So this welcome is a Beam Exchange webinar. We call it Grab the Mic because it's a space for practitioners to talk about their experience, their learning, their knowledge, their mistakes and how they solve their problems. I'm Mike Albu. I'm the director of the Beam Exchange, and it's my privilege to host these spaces. And today I'm very excited about the speakers, the three speakers we have, all of them from Mercy Corps. They're going to be talking about tackling the challenge of youth employment, particularly the role that digital tech plays. So they call that Jobtech, and the title of the webinar is Can Jobtech Create Sustainable, Decent Work for Millions of Unemployed Youth? So I'm very pleased we have Meseret Tefera who's the leader of the LIWAY program in Ethiopia. And she also serves as an advisor for the Mercy Corps' Ethiopia MSD program. And alongside her, we have Gituku Ngene, who's a senior venture building manager for the Jobtech Alliance, which is the program they're going to be talking about. And also Mercy, sorry, I've got that wrong. Gituku is the global advisor for youth employment at Mercy Corps. And Mercy, who's the third speaker, is the senior venture building manager for the Jobtech Alliance. Apologies for misrepresenting you there. So I'm going to hand over in a second, but just before I do, I just want to remind you, if you're new to these webinars, of two features that you'll find really useful. One is the chat box, which you'll see at the bottom, hopefully a link to it, and you can please do introduce yourself there, because it's difficult to know who else is in the room, but we've got 45 people here now, and do let them know who you are. But also, as and when you have questions for the speakers, please use the Q&A box for that. Don't use the chat for the questions, use the Q&A box. And at the end of the presentation, which is going to be about 30 minutes long, we'll have hopefully a decent amount of time for the speakers to respond to your questions and have a proper conversation. So like I say, the Q&A box is for questions, the chat box is for conversing with other members of the room. And I'm going to hand over to Gituku to open and introduce the webinar.
Great. Thank you very much, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here. And we'll dive right in. And just to give you an overview of today's session, we'll look at Jobtech and sort of unpack that and why it is important. Then we'll look at Jobtech and the nexus between Jobtech and market systems. And then we'll go into a few examples, particularly putting a spotlight on the Jobtech Alliance, which is our Pan-African program at Mercy Corps focusing on Jobtech, and something more country-specific, which is what we are doing with the LIWAY program in Ethiopia. Now, I'll dive right in and sort of, introduce Jobtech to us. And, it's a bit of a, quote unquote mystical term. So, I would understand if some of us in the room struggle with what Jobtech is. And we define Jobtech as, innovations that involve the use of technology to facilitate access to quality work opportunities, and that enable delivery and improvement of worker productivity. Now, there are a few aspects here that are worth noting, and particularly, when we think about, how technology is being used to facilitate access, really opening up how people are able to access work. But not just that, we've also seen it being used to enable the delivery of that work, as well as enabling workers to improve their productivity. And there are a couple of dimensions to this. And what we've done at Mercy Corps is to sort of, split this into a number of sectors, because we see different use cases of Jobtech. So our nomenclature has 5 distinct subsectors. The first one is where we are seeing platforms that enable offline work. So this is where the intermediation or the access bit of the work happens online, but the delivery of the work will happen offline. So good examples here will be, platforms that will provide access to blue-collar workers or domestic workers, or ride-hailing platforms sort of sitting within this bucket. The other bucket is platforms for digitally delivered work. And unlike the first bucket, here, both the intermediation and the delivery of the work happens online. So a young person would, go to a platform like Upwork and sort of get a customer sitting somewhere in Silicon Valley or in London, and would actually deliver that work using their device. So either a computer or a smartphone. This will be, for example, a software developer or a translator or someone who's doing micro work. And then when we move to the third category, which is micro enterprise digitization, the form changes a little bit. And this is where we see technology serving micro entrepreneurs. And this will be platforms that are providing services and tools. So for example, e-commerce marketplaces that enable traders to sell their goods online, or platforms that enable like various facilitation services, so like logistics, financial services, or business growth tools, to sort of record customer sales and and things like those. Then the fourth bucket is around skilling, where we've seen platforms coming up that enable workers to develop requisite skills, get credentialing, and sort of upskill themselves. And this also contributes to how they access and deliver work, particularly the bit where we mentioned around like self-improvement. Then the last category down there is digital tools for worker enablement. And with this particular one, which is much more recent and budding, this will be platforms that are enabling things like professional identity, access to social benefits, worker representation, and the like. And so these are distinct platforms. There's some overlaps amongst some of them, but quite largely we do see a lot of interrelationship between them. Now, we did a recent mapping 2 years ago, and in 2021, there are about 323 platforms in Africa, and these were all active, which speaks to the proliferation of these platforms. And I would imagine, we sort of see a bigger growth in other developing parts of the world. But when we ask ourselves what's driving this growth, we see it pointing to a couple of factors. So one is mobile penetration. A lot of people have access to devices, particularly smartphones, which allow a lot of this interaction with digital platforms. But we've also seen mobile money being a big contributor, especially when you think about payments, and also access to internet. Of course, there's the accessibility question around, the digital data divide, especially when you think about rural, urban, or gender aspects. But quite largely, this has been the driving force, in terms of the growth of this kind of usage of platforms and technology to access and deliver work. Now, of course, we do see Jobtech disrupting a lot of this space, multiple aspects of the labor market, when you think about both the supply and demand aspects of it, but also when you think about the supporting functions and the norms, right? So when you think about it from a market systems point of view, you do see, Jobtech playing an increasingly major role and disrupting a lot of these functions. But what we've also seen is that, we are yet to get to breakthrough solutions, and a lot of these solutions are yet from, are quite far from getting to the point of scale. And when you compare them with areas like fintech and edtech and clean tech, which are a bit more advanced, you realize that we still have a way to go. And so against this backdrop, it's a good point to sort of ask ourselves, what's that nexus between market systems and Jobtech? And we do see a couple of areas. The first one being where we are seeing Jobtech being used to address underperforming functions within these labor markets. So particularly, around complementing or replacing various functions that have sort of taken a traditional, have had a traditional approach to them. So when you think about skills, e-learning, for example, would be, we are seeing a lot of it complementing the TVET sector, for instance, but also in other areas, replacing it altogether and, changing how people access skills. But we've also seen Jobtech creating linkages across multiple functions. So for example, where we see, job matching as a practice, how young people learn about opportunities and access work, being combined with skilling. So where job platforms are also able to provide skilling and upskilling services. So that linkage is one area where Jobtech has, significantly penetrated, market systems. The other area is we see Jobtech as a pathway to sustainability and scale. Now, when you think about Industry 4.0, which is, this fancy term around the role that technology is playing increasingly around how we access work and how we interact, we do see Jobtech as a segue into the future of work. And so for programs that, are particularly centered around employment and employment solutions, we do see, Jobtech allowing them to sort of venture into what work models look like in the future and how they're changing and how we can adapt young people to really leverage these kind of opportunities. But even as we do that, we say, we really need to be inclusive and ensure that we are accelerating reach, particularly to vulnerable groups. So when you think about women, refugees who've traditionally been left behind, it's really critical that we ensure that, we are not widening that gap by adopting technology. Then the third area is sort of, flipping it around and asking ourselves, how do we apply market systems principles to transform Jobtech? And we see a lot of relevance here in the sense that, Jobtech as a space is still very fragmented and underperforming. And we are yet to see, crowding in around solutions and that level of skill that, we do anticipate. And so here we do see market systems as a potential, discipline that can help cement this ecosystem and unlock growth and, provide opportunities for young people. And so with this kind of background, I think this will be a good point for us to switch and speak about some of the examples of what we are doing. And a good starting point will be the Jobtech Alliance, which is this Pan-African program that we are implementing across 10 countries. And I'll invite Mangeni, who's our venture builder, our senior venture building manager there, to take it up and tell us more about the Jobtech Alliance. Masi, over to you.
Thanks, Gituku. So for the next couple of minutes, I'll be walking you through, how we've adapted market systems principles of the Jobtech Alliance. But before we do that, I think it's important for all of us to understand what is the Jobtech and what do we do at the Jobtech Alliance. Now, the Jobtech Alliance is an ecosystem building initiative around inclusive Jobtech in Africa, where we support digital platforms that connect people to work opportunities. Now, some of these examples have been mentioned by Gituku before, that include gig matching platforms, job matching platforms, e-commerce marketplaces, ride-hailing apps, among others. So those are the kind of platforms that we support. And we primarily work across two main work streams, as you see highlighted on your screens. So the first is catalyzing inclusive business growth, and then the next is building or putting together an inclusive enabling environment. So let's begin with the first one, catalyzing inclusive business growth. But before we do that, I think I'll just quote one of our steering committee members who's more articulate than I am, where he says, in this case, the Jobtech Alliance is not necessarily going to solve a problem with any one company. However, what we are doing in our programming is investing at the tip of the spear in those companies that can teach us about, the sector. Now, what does this then mean in practice? It means as much as we are providing support to finite number of platforms, those platforms are able to teach us about what the future of work would look like in the next decade or more. And we're supporting these platforms to become more scalable, more inclusive, and more impactful. And we are doing so using different or a combination of different support systems where we're providing venture building support, grant capital, and access to different networks. But let me give you a flavor exactly of how this works, right? So, and I'll give you a quick example here with one platform that we're supporting. Now, this platform is called Wowzy. It's a Kenyan-based platform, which is a digital advertising marketplace that matches influencers to brands. Now, if you think about it, in the past 10 years, this is a way in which you would never have thought that young people would earn income through platform work. But now, using or through this platform, any young person who's either on Instagram or TikTok or and has a following of 250 plus followers can be able to earn money using this platform. Now, what are we doing with them? We are supporting them to scale and expand into Uganda and hopefully then create about 1,300 jobs, particularly in Uganda. But this is not all that we do with Wowzy. Now, the larger objective for us is to ensure that the ecosystem is learning about this platform. So for instance, when we support different platforms, we go in with answering different hypotheses. In this case, do passive income create, or contribute to meaningful livelihood? So once we're able to learn this learnings can then be shared with the larger ecosystem. And we do so, as Gituku mentioned, using a Pan-African lens, where we work across 10 countries in sub-Saharan Africa, as highlighted on your screens. Now, the second bit is, or the second work stream is building, enabling an inclusive and an enabling environment where we're putting together a community of all stakeholders that are interested in Jobtech. And so far, we have about 800 plus community members. But that's not all we do. We also focus on research and insights, where we churn out both, if you could go to the next slide, we churn out both long form and short form content and research that are available within the industry that anyone can have access to, and you can read through those. Similarly, we are putting together an investment network where we can increase the inflow of capital into Jobtech platforms or into the Jobtech industry, as well as putting together open source standards and tools. For instance, we just recently launched a quality of work tool with the ILO Systems Initiative change. And we're also doing something around policy, where our approach is more reactive than proactive for now. But yeah, let me then make a case of why the Jobtech Alliance is a systems change program. And our theory of change, or the theory of change we've adapted, is as shown on your screens. And some of the reasons why I think Jobtech is important is because it solves different, because it solves different problems and challenges within the sector. The first being, there's obviously a lack of collaborative ecosystem within the Jobtech industry, where we have no peer-to-peer interactions, we have no place where people can come together and share learnings. So that's one of the key challenges within the Jobtech industry. Another is the platform practices that have been adopted by different startups are very competitive in nature. Everyone cares about their bottom line, which they should, but that then stifles learning within the sector. Then there's a lack of legal protection and weak policies that are unclear. For instance, when it comes to representation, fairness of income, fairness of work, and many more challenges. But how are we as the Jobtech Alliance, or what are we as a Jobtech Alliance doing to contribute to that systems change? Number one is to support the platforms, as mentioned earlier, to become scalable and impactful. For instance, we are looking to work with 30 plus platforms in the next 3 years or so, so that they're able to improve their business models, and by so doing, are able to contribute or create opportunities for young people to get work through these platforms. We're also building a collaborative ecosystem. As I've mentioned earlier, we are putting together a community where different platforms and different peers can share the good and bad practices within the industries. so that, this ecosystem can become more collaborative. And again, as mentioned, we are working on creating better policies within the industry. And by so doing, we are aiming at shifting, or there's different things we're aiming at shifting. Number one is improving the income of users or workers on this platform, upskilling them through supporting tech-enabled skilling platforms, increasing job security and better working conditions. And by so doing, hopefully be able to contribute to the creation and improvement of decent jobs across Africa. Now, in the next 3 years, we are hoping to, create about 10,000 jobs. But again, as we all are aware, systems change takes time. And so we are looking at this as a 10-year initiative. And given that we have a target of 10,000 in the next 3 years, in the next decade, we are looking at millions of jobs created and improved. And we want to invite, the sector to meaningfully define what this outcome would look like in the next decade. But all this to say, we're looking at this as a long-term initiative rather than a short-term initiative. So I'll pause there and hand it back over to Gituku.
Great, thank you very much, Marcy. I think that's some very solid perspective on what Jobtech looks from a Pan-African approach. And we'll switch gears at this point to look at it more at a country lens level and speak about the LIWAY program. And how this differs from the Jobtech Alliance is what the LIWAY program is trying is, looking at Jobtech as part of a broader initiative. So there's a broader market systems initiative that's looking at different angles of the labor market. And Jobtech is just one of these, and we'd want to hear how the program is applying Jobtech within that broader program. And for this, I'll invite Meseret Tefera, who's the program lead for LIWAY, to take us through. Meseret, please feel free to take it away.
Thank you so much, Gituku, and really happy to join this panel to share what we're doing in LIWAY as a program. So to give you kind of a hint on what we do, LIWAY is short for livelihood improvement for women and youth, and it's a market system program that's being implemented in the capital city, Addis. It has an objective of creating income for youth and women within this city through different means. And these are, you can categorize as being through improved wage opportunities or self-employment opportunities. And the way we've gone about this is, since this is a consortium program, each of consortium partners, Mercy Corps, SNV, TechnoServe, and Save the Children, has taken up the different systems that potentially looks into the demand and supply side of overall income creation. So we look into, Save the Children looks into the skills element or the skill system. SNV looks at medium and small enterprises still being in the demand side and looking at large and medium enterprises. TechnoServe looks into that. And we as Mercy Corps try to look into the labor system as a system and try to solve for the different constraints. These are not separate programs as such within the same one program. They feed into one another to make sure that the overall objective of the program, which is actually increasing income opportunity, is being achieved. So looking at the labor system, we have done a deep dive analysis to understand what are the main constraints and challenges that women and youth are facing in participation to this market. And we've looked at that the way employees and employees interact is really broken down, and in some ways you would feel paradoxical in a way that some of the opportunities that are present in the labor market are not reaching to the type of target group that we look into. So we call this a labor exchange infrastructure, basically how these two players interact, and these different interventions that we've designed, both online and offline opportunities. The online opportunities have presented a lot of opportunities for use. So we've partnered with many digital solution providers, private entities, but I'll just focus on one of that engagement that we've done with one of the particular and how we went about it and what changed it. So as I say, the critical constraint that we've identified in this exchange infrastructure is that appropriate platform for these employers and employees to interact. And one of the solutions that we were able to design was an online platform that looks into digital gig work connections. So gig connections related to different service providers, be it plumbers or electricians or domestic helps or supports. So there was this entity that's called G-Online that we're looking into that as a potential entry point, and we've partnered with them to test this model and see how it contributes to the overall system. So you can access their digital platforms through different means. You can access it through SMAs, you can access it through USAID, and or actually download the application, and different gig service providers are registered in that platform where they are able to be connected to employers around their community, and they can the platform can geolocate where they are so that they are able to access opportunities within their vicinity. So with this partner, what we've done as a LIWAY program is actually buy down the risk of the technology development that G-Online used. It's called customer relation. They had their own customer relationship management platform that they've designed. They've designed a call center and SMA services, and this kind of technologies actually require a lot of investments. And as an MSD program, that's what we've done as LIWAY. Not only that, in terms of monetary value, we try to work on the business case as well as how the partner thinks about their business model in entering into the market and where they will be able to source their income stream. So those type of conversations and those type of technical skills were what LIWAY brought to the table with this partner. So as a result of that partnership, currently the platform has more than 35,000 gig workers that are registered and are continuously being connected to this kind of opportunities, creating a stable opportunity for more than 6,000 employees. But if you ask as LIWAY what's the biggest achievement for this partnership, I would say that through this engagement, we were able to make this partner ready for additional investment. So they are now at a stage where they were able to attract additional capital investment from a venture capital ownership. So for you to be able to do that, you really have to have a business case and you really have to show your worth. And so that's like one of the very good achievements that we've done through these partnerships. Not only that, but we're also looking at, from an ecosystem perspective, a growing interest and players coming in the market to disrupt this or even to use this opportunity for their customers. So the journey was not, all flowers. Definitely, we had some key lessons that we felt can be shared. The first is related to, as a program, you would prefer to work with a more established private sector actor. But in this scenario, in this context where the market is very thin and the type of things that you're trying to do are really non-traditional, then you as a program needs to be open to opportunities, to explore opportunities, and a little bit act as, you know, you have to take the risk to be able to work with this kind of partner. So that's the biggest lesson. So at the start of the program, there were no, even finding one single partner was very difficult, but now we've seen a growing interest. So it is one lesson that we can take. The second is working in Jobtech. You're not actually working with only one company, but you really need to adapt to the external and business environment challenges. So Jobtech, it's highly related to the enabling environment that is in connection with telecommunication, connectivity, national ID or unique identification. So there are a number of structural issues that comes with working with Jobtech companies and private companies, and you need to be able to adapt to those challenges. To give you an example, recently in Ethiopia, there has been a ban in using social media, and that has affected tremendously these businesses, because no one can access these kind of platforms without using VPN, and that ultimately means that for the business, they cannot actually push out marketing messagings. So there needs to be certain adaptation to that. The third is related to cultural consideration. So you have to recognize both from the job seekers as well as the employer side that this is a very new space, and there needs to be time to adapt to the changes and the shifts in terms of like using this kind of platform. So there is a certain behavioral change element that requires building trust, that requires different mechanisms to market your product as a private company. So taking that into consideration is really important. Last but not least is really in relation to your program and your program team's capability. Jobtech is a very new space, and it requires some technical words, gadgets that you as a program may not be you know, aware of. We as a program were struggling in the initial bit, and having one team member that was in that space and understand some of the conversations that needs to happen with the private sector definitely helped, and really leveraging the technical support that you find within your company or within your organization, as well as reaching out to those that are doing this is really important, because as a market systems program, you will be working with your partners, and you really need to understand what they're talking about when it comes to Jobtech. Yeah, thank you so much. Over to you, Gituku.
Thank you, Meseret. Really great to hear that. And I think I'll turn it back to Mike. I believe this will be a good point to take questions. And Mike, I'm sure you may have a couple of questions from the field, or rather from the audience. So please walk us through and direct us on that end.
Thank you, Gituku, and thank you, Meseret and Mercy, for fascinating presentations. Let's keep the slide deck available in case we need to refer to it. This I should have said at the beginning, for those of you who are not familiar with the Beam Exchange, we are a platform for knowledge exchange and learning about market systems development, and what you've just heard is a good example of that. But also, you know, this is an opportunity for you, please, to ask questions or even talk about your own experience that's related to Jobtech. And use the Q&A box, please, to just to put anything there you would like, you're curious about. I'm going to start with a question from Stefan, who's in Albania working for Helvetas. In fact, I think we might have him online. Stefan, can you hear us? Can you speak?
Do you hear me?
We do hear you, yes. Please.
Okay, so a very warm welcome from Albania. A hot welcome. Congratulations. First, when I saw the numbers, you say share of mobile internet. You gave impressive numbers of the use of smartphones, of all phone connections, and use access to finance. So I was amazed. And then when I saw the presentation, I saw you're principally doing the right thing. So using medias and using a technology which is widespread and has a big outreach. The question is always the traditional ones that I have. It's about the business model, and the business model has an owner, somebody behind it carrying on over a longer time, which then also involves finances. So the question was just who is running these platforms and how are they financed also over time?
Can I rebut that question to Mercy? Because part of what the Jobtech Alliance is doing is really looking at business models and supporting programs around that. Do you want to speak to that, Mercy?
Yes, thanks, Gituku. I think in terms of financing, what we've seen in the market is generally Jobtech platforms do not have access to financing. So there's very limited access to financing. And that's why we are sort of thinking about putting together an investment network that can deploy capital into this space. But that said, there's different forms of financing that various, Jobtech platforms have traditionally tapped into. Of course, there's the commercial financing where you're talking about, VCs or venture capital funds and private equity funds, but also the grant or the non-commercial type of funding, which is the grant capital. Now, on the commercial side of funding, I think what we've seen in the market, the platforms that tend to attract the, highest or huge chunks of commercial capital are platforms around digitizing micro enterprises, particularly from an African context. So, and I could mention some of them. For instance, if you're familiar or know of Wasoko, or used to previously was SokoWatch, if you know of Market Force, and these are just some of the examples that are, at Jobtech and have been able to attract, big chunks of commercial financing. Similarly, e-commerce platforms, which are generally platforms for offline work. If I was to draw parallels with the taxonomy that Gituku shared earlier, they tend to attract more commercial capital than others. But generally what we've seen is the earlier stage companies or the earlier stage platforms tend not to tap or get access into this type of funding, either because they're struggling with their business models around sustainability or how to define their revenue models and things like that. So those are some of the challenges which we are solving for at the Jobtech Alliance, to be able to allow or support these platforms to tap into their sources of capital. And as I mentioned during the presentation, we also do provide a bit of grant capital to sort of catalyze, investments into the space. So that's as far as, and I hope I've answered your question, but that's as far as funding within the Jobtech space goes.
And maybe I can just add one or two things, Mercy. Just to mention that the entities that we are working with are purely for-profit ventures, because we believe companies with strong business models can sustain the solutions that we are trying to achieve. And so, when these businesses are anchored on models where they're making money off the solutions that they are developing or that we are developing with them, then we believe that, the ability to sustain and to scale these solutions is much higher than if we are working, through this ourselves. And just to give you a bit of history, when Masiko started venturing into the digital jobs space, as we called it back then, we actually developed a platform where we thought that we could do the digital matchmaking ourselves. And quite frankly, that, failed terribly because, it wasn't anchored on a feasible commercial model. And so, based on the learnings over the years, we've realized that, by working with ventures that build these solutions in a commercial in a commercial and sustainable way, then there's higher chance of us seeing success in this space, but more importantly, ensuring that these solutions grow beyond just the interventions that development agencies like ourselves are looking at.
Thank you, Gituku. A couple more questions have come in now. There's an interesting one from Julia Sorensen. Julia, I don't know if you've got a microphone, but I think I'll just pose your question for you. How did you decide? I guess this is almost a strategic question. How did you decide on investing in Jobtech versus a more traditional kind of sectoral approach, which would focus on growing employment in high growth sectors, for example?
Shall I pull in Meseret to answer that, especially because I know Meseret in Ethiopia, you have both the Jobtech and the traditional approaches as part of your programming. Mm-hmm. So could you speak to, how you're complementing those two and why you focused on Jobtech? And then maybe if I have something to add, I could weigh in later on.
Thanks, Gituku. So to answer that question, I would refer back to as a market system program, you always start with your analysis and trying to understand how different target groups, especially the target that you're interested in, interact in the market. And our program being women and youth, you happen to see what are like the trends that are in the market, and how can you respond to that. So in exchange infrastructure, we've looked into both situations where you see in Addis, for example, people go and try to find access job opportunity in a job boards that are like located in one space, and you see, but that has changed through time. And that is where we were able to capture in terms of the different investments that we made. We were trying to do digital job boards. We still do some offline versions, which are like related to job fairs that try to pull in physically employers and employees. But the type of jobs, even the traditional definition of jobs has shifted, and it's really important to be in tune with the changing market situations, that you see youth are now more interested to do a lot of non-traditional jobs that used to not be available to them. So these kind of digital platforms have given that opportunity for that target group. So just in a nutshell, really being able to understand what is a changing trend in the market, and being able to respond to that.
Great, thank you, Meseret. Masi, anything to add from your side?
No, I think Meseret.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, I'd also just mentioned that Jobtech in its nature is very agnostic, and that's one thing, as an organization that does programming in both MSD and Jobtech. I think that's one of the very big difference that we've seen in our Jobtech programming. The fact that its agnostic nature allows us to transcend multiple sectors. And so,
could you just explain what you mean by agnostic?
Yep. So in the sense that, like if you look at, so if I just go a few slides back, yes. So here, so if you look at these kind of platforms, right? A lot of the use cases that we see across these platforms will transcend or will cover multiple sectors. So there could be a gig platform that's working in, like the ag sector, and a similar gig platform could be working in the logistics and, like taxi hailing industry, and a similar model could be applied in the construction industry. So in a sense, we are not limited to just one sector. But our interventions are able to look at multiple sectors. Similarly, when you think about micro enterprise, the nature of micro enterprises in developing countries, and especially where a lot of these businesses and enterprises are informal, is that they cut across different sectors. So you'll find, young people or workers in agriculture, while at the same time they're still in the transport business. At the same time, they're dabbling in renewable energy, in tech. So the fact that they're cutting across multiple areas, and Jobtech allows us to sort of cut across those areas using the same underlying technologies. Is really powerful. And so we see a big opportunity there to sort of complement what we're doing with our market systems programming. And I think that's one area where we really see this nexus between market systems and Jobtech coming in really, really well.
Thank you very much. So there's a related question from Stephen Hunt, who's in Thailand. He can't speak because his connection's rather poor, but he asked me to. His question was really about exactly this point. Is there an alignment between a kind of an approach to creating sort of decent mass scale digital jobs? Can you align that development goal with a development goal that's about sort of structural economic transformation? Getting people new, more productive sectors.
Yep, sure. I can take that, and then Mercy, please feel free to weigh in at the risk of speaking too much. So, but one thing we've seen is what I'd call the much broader evolution of the digital economy. And we are witnessing this not just in developing countries, but developed countries as well, where economies are increasingly being defined by technology, and multiple aspects of the economy, the social life, etc. Have very strong tech components to them, or like have underlying technology. Technologies like then becoming the underlying unique driver now. And so as we think about Jobtech, we also think about how do we progressively work with economies, with countries, with private sector to really adapt and ensure that these countries are really stepping up and moving on with the rest of the world. And there are varying degrees. So for some countries, this adoption is much more advanced. So when you think about countries like Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, those will be like tier one of that kind of adoption, that like digital entrenchment, the entrenchment of the digital aspect into the economies. And then you sort of have tier twos coming in. This will be the Ethiopias and the Ugandas, etc. And then you sort of have a bunch that still have a long way to go. But the reality is that we're not just looking at Jobtech as a solution for jobs, but we're also cognizant that technology is also affecting other aspects. So when you think about, fintech, for instance, is one area that's significantly way more advanced than Jobtech, and appreciating that the kind of advancements we've seen in such sectors really speak to what we anticipate in the job sector. But I'll also pivot to Mercy just to hear what the experience on the Jobtech Alliance side has been.
Yeah, I could also maybe just touch a little bit on the decency of work or the decent jobs from Jobtech platforms. I think it's quite a ripe time for us to come into this market. And I'll draw parallels between the African market and the, Europe or America, markets. I think for us within the sub-Saharan Africa, we view Jobtech as a source of income. So for instance, if it's a, drive on a ride hailing app, they would view this rather than just viewing it as a gig work, they'd also view it as sort of a source of income. So sometimes it becomes very hard to then measure what decency of work looks like from a platform perspective, because decency of work is really, it's based on the perception of the worker or the user. So I think the reason I say it's a right time for us to come into the space is because then we can avoid some of the, mistakes that were made by, Jobtech platforms that have scaled and grown in, in Europe and have sort of entered the African market, or in the Americans market that has entered into the, into the African market. To give you a good example is ride-hailing apps, for instance. Or courier or fulfillment apps that are in Europe or advanced markets. Some of the mistakes that they've made, this is the right time for us to then come together as a collaborative ecosystem to say, hey, I think this is how we could tweak this platform to increase decent work for Africans in Africa. So that's just one thing to add on around decent work in the platform economy.
Thank you very much. But I want to just address a question that was sent in advance by Gordon Freer, who I don't think is with us now, but he was asking about the digital divide, which is obviously a huge issue in pretty much every country on the planet. The question is, what strategies have you encountered or applied for overcoming this this problem, and do these deter youth-orientated urbanization?
Let me try to answer that question. So it comes to really being aware, like Jobtech is not a solution for everything, and really trying to understand that what you will be able to do as a program in the market and with the existing infrastructures. Even if you see in the initial stage, Gituku has shown us like how the uptake is in terms of internet technology, smartphones. There still needs to be a well-thought strategy that needs to be in place when you try to do that in a country where like not everybody would equally access those kind of resources. So some of the things that our private partners actually adopt is trying hybrid models where you avail your services not only through the digital means, but also using a call center, for example. So a woman who is not able to register in your platform can call a USSD, a number, and she would have a call center person that will help her go through that process. So really understanding like not everybody would have the same opportunities. Even in sourcing some of the service providers in those platforms, you wouldn't use the traditional marketing tools like advertising in TVs. You might need to go to door to door to advertise your app. Go to places, for example, we call them labor hubs, for example, where you find a number of youths collectively in one place, one location, and the marketing or the salespeople of these kind of platforms, they go and make sure that they register different service providers and they introduce those kind of services to them. So even as part of your marketing strategy from a private service provider side, it needs to be different and needs to be adopted. In some cases, for example, there are government-owned or even private-owned centers that help with assisted registration. So you go to those centers physically to be able to register in those platforms. There is also a strategy that needs to incorporate which type of platforms or social media outlets that are more used in that community or in that urban city. For Addis, for example, Telegram has more uptake than WhatsApp. So some of the marketing, even some of the platform services are focusing on those type of platforms. So it's really being being able to understand who the users are, and we shouldn't, this type of decisions are not only made from the getting service providers, but also the demand from employers as well. Ultimately, what type of jobs, what type of service providers are being demanded, and really looking into that data and information so that you can align your strategy in sourcing those type of service providers. Those are some of the strategies that you can help your private partner to adopt.
Thank you very much, Meseret. Couple of maybe quick questions, but just to sort of re-emphasize what it is exactly the work that your partners are doing. What does it look like? There was a couple of questions from Simon Kika. I know you've answered one of them, Mercy, but what kind of technical assistance exactly are you providing to businesses, and what kind of new tech, for example, are you helping introduce?
Great. So in terms of the technical assistance support we provide, it's very responsive to the business needs, and it's customized to the strategic focus of the business. So for instance, if it's a strategy for the business to scale into a new geography, then we would come in and support just on that, on a particular sprint. A sprint generally takes between 1 to 6 months. If it's, say, the company needs support in figuring out their, marketing strategy, then would come in and completely support in that. If it's putting together or building, a user-friendly or, user-friendly interface, then would come in and supporting that. So it's very, very responsive in terms of, what the business needs are and their strategic focus. In terms of the new tech that we've introduced, maybe not necessarily new. However, this is just to say, first of all, and I saw a question around what's the criteria. One of the criteria in which we use to onboard different platforms is they need to have a platform that's already live, or a beta version, at least a beta version of the platform. So that means tech is already infused into this business. And as we talk about scale, I know Meseret and Gituku have also, touched on scale, especially when incorporating tech. So what we are seeing in the market is lots of businesses are coming to us already having integrated tech. So for instance, we are looking at, or what we've seen is Web3, for instance, becoming quite common for Jobtech platforms. We're also seeing different user interfaces, or at least different variations of user interfaces being integrated into tech platforms. But remember, just to also caveat that response is to say, we are not the ones introducing new tech for their businesses. Generally, these businesses would have already figured out what they would want to do to enhance their, their business operations or optimize that, and then we would come in and support in whatever, in whatever tech that they would want to build out. Back to you, Mike. Unless Gituku, you have anything to add there?
Well, not really. I think that's spot on, Marcy.
Thank you very much. So, I mean, we are getting very close to the end of our hour. As it was a little bit slow to get going, but I think now that there's lots of questions coming in, we may not be able to cover everything, but let's see if we can cover a couple more. Before you all go, can you please look at the link in the chat box that Isabel has just provided, which is a little quick survey. It'll take you 30 seconds just to give us some feedback on the webinar for the purposes of the Beam Exchange, so we can improve our offering. And remember that if you are interested in being the person speaking in this event, please contact us and propose future webinars. We're always looking for interesting proposals for new webinars about practical work on the ground. So look, I'm just picking up on what you were saying there, Mercy, about the criteria you use for choosing partners. How do you prevent, this is a question from Multi Reshoft Hex, how do you prevent market distortion in the support that you're providing to particular companies? I mean, how do you avoid this horrible thing that we worry about, which is kind of giving an unfair advantage to one business over another?
Yeah, I'll answer that, and then Meseret can also pull from her experience as well. I think for us is to put together a very open criteria in which we use to, select companies. I think that's the beginning. So once that is, open and, communicated, I think then there's usually buy-in from different platforms if they are, accepted or not accepted into the, to provide for us to provide support to them. But that said, as I mentioned earlier, we also have built together a community which is, accessible to any of the platform, whether, they fit our criteria or not, or whether they qualify to get sort of in-depth support or not. So through such ways or through such methods, then we are able to still onboard different platforms, and they can still learn from each other. They can still access all this, ecosystem learnings that we keep sharing with different platforms, just with the exception of grant financing. So I think they still do get support in one way or another, because again, we are building an inclusive ecosystem, and a platform that may not qualify now may qualify in 2 years. So it's not to say that, we completely, reject them, but we put them close so that we're able to sort of track their progress as we move along. And these are platforms that can be able to create job opportunities for, in the next coming few years. But Meseret, if you are able to also pull from your experience.
Yeah, that's a very tricky thing to avoid, especially if you're doing, for example, open call for innovative, innovative ideas. That was what our approach was. It was an open call and was open to everyone who was interested to solve this problem. But as you work with one partner, since we try to not invest too much so that it becomes very difficult for another to duplicate what they're doing. So we try to limit in terms of monetary investment, to limit that investment to an acceptable amount so that it's easier for others to copy and enter the market. But I do agree in terms of what Mercy said, creating a platform for each different partners to come together, learn from each other. We do hold like different stakeholder meetings that we bring in the different even the different partners that we see can scale up what we are testing and piloting with one single private actor.
Thank you. Gituku, maybe the final word to use.
Just really quick, because I know folks have to drop off, but just to add on to Meseret and Mercy's point, one thing that we've historically done at Mercycorp is to be very candid with partners that we engage, that whatever we're doing with them has an ecosystem lens to it. And so even when we provide support, part of what we've embedded to that support is a public facing output of that. So for example, if we're, exploring a new market, we'll say, we'll support you with this, but part of this will be learnings and findings that will be broadcasted to the larger ecosystem. And what that does is that, well, we are trying to prove a case with the company here and, establish if this works or not. We also, transferring a lot of these learnings to peers and competitors and making sure that they're benefiting from the work that we're doing with these, industry leaders. So that has been very crucial in terms of, minimizing that undue advantage. And it's something that we continue to apply in our Jobtech and systems programming at Mercycorp.
Well, that's great. Well, maybe that's a really nice note to end on.